Hello, I'm Lee Mahoney, Chief Operating Officer of the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. Thanks for joining us in the second in our series of Chats with Charlie. More than 5,000 people tuned in to our first event with Charles Shaughnessy, Dan Loria, and Jack Maxwell. Wow. Tonight, we're fortunate to have with us again our actor friends, Charles Shaughnessy and Jack Maxwell. They're going to talk about their lives and why the stories of our courageous children so resonate with them. Charlie is a longtime volunteer with us and a member of our advisory council, so we're fans for a lot of reasons. And welcome back, Jack. Thank you. RFK Children's Action Corps was founded to carry forward the legacy of Robert F. Kennedy and to promote social justice. The protests against systemic racism taking place across the nation and the world speak to the urgent need for true equality and fairness. We've tackled this issue in the realm of juvenile justice, where youth of color are at a higher risk of being arrested, arraigned, and detained. Once in detention, they're more likely to experience school failure and ongoing contact with law enforcement and the courts. Our Detention Diversion Advocacy Program, or DDAP, works with the juvenile courts to keep Black and brown children out of detention and on a positive path forward. Combating racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice is but one piece of the work that needs to be done to ensure an equitable society. Like the rest of the world, we also have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has added stressors to families already facing many challenges. We work with many children whose families struggle with alcoholism and other substance use disorders. It takes a huge toll on their self-esteem, their ability to express their feelings and trust others and establish relationships. It also puts them at a higher risk for abuse and neglect, and for becoming alcohol or substance use dependent themselves. COVID-19 has further isolated these kids, often in unsafe and unstable homes. Our Children of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse, or COASA, is one of the ways that we help these children. Now I'll turn the conversation over to Jack and Charlie. Welcome again, and thank you for being here. And thank you, Jack, for auctioning off your guitar to help our kids.
Thank you, Lee, and welcome everyone. Welcome to Conversations in the Time of Quarantine. It's so great to be with you guys here. I know we did a show, the last show we did with Jack and Dan and myself was a kind of one-off. So this is actually the first in a series of these conversations, these chats I'm going to be having with different people from different walks of life, getting their perspectives on all kinds of different things. And the whole show is presented by the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. So the idea is at some point in the show, we can steer the conversation back to some of the remarkable things that the RFK Children's Action Corps do and the impact they have on not just the lives of the kids and young adults that they serve, but on our society as a whole and how those ripples affect all of us. But more about that later. I am so delighted to have as my first guest on this show, Jack Maxwell. He is a fabulous actor. You may remember him from 24 and Lost on TV. He was the host of Travel Channel's Booze Traveler, which is, I think, on for about 5 or 6 years, where he traveled the world trying different, imbibing different concoctions. And he's a producer. He's a producer now of 2 shows, Belly Up, a game show, and The High Road, a fascinating show that we're going to hear more about later on. And you can catch them online. So I am delighted to say thank you for joining us and thank you for coming back, Jack Maxwell.
Oh, Charlie, what a nice introduction. You know, I feel bad now because when I hosted the thing with you and Dan Loria, that introduction that I gave you wasn't nearly as nice. So I'm going to have to, I owe you one.
You owe me one. Listen, it's just a mutual appreciation society. But, you know, it's really terrific of you to be on today. And you're kind of popping my cherry as an interviewer. So thank you for doing that. I can't think of anyone better.
I'm a friendly for sure.
So tell me, I'm going to start I'm going to start off with the old chestnut bit. It's always interesting to get in it and get into things this way. Why and how did you get into this business? What got you into showbiz?
Oh, wow. I wonder, there's so many things along the line that either inspired me or pushed me forward, then held me back. So many, but I guess from the beginning, if you want to go back that far, when I was a little kid, I was fascinated with television. I used it as an escape. I grew up without a father, without a brother, without uncles around or anything like that. So I played a lot of sports and I got fairly good at that, but in Boston, the weather's not always great where I grew up. So a lot of television, and I escaped into that. And I would jump over the couch, my mother says, I don't remember, pretending I was James West from Wild Wild West. And I'm sure every kid played, cowboys and Indians. And I was fascinated with Batman. And one day, because she must have seen something in my eyes, my mother said, that's not really Batman and Robin. I said, Ma, I know. It's Adam West and Burt Ward. No, I didn't say that. I said it's Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson. Right. And she said, no, it's Adam West and Burt. That's how it happened, because it was such a long time ago. And I said, what? They're not real? They're not, none of it's real? And I was just such a little kid. And I thought it would be fascinating. So I spent the rest of my life until I finally got into it, just hemming and hawing, not having the confidence to do it because of the way I grew up and didn't have anyone who knew anything about acting. And the older kids in the neighborhood would make fun of you, saying, what do you want to do that for? What are you, a sissy? Go play hockey for the Bruins or the Red Sox. Do something with them. And so I really never grasped the real passion I have for it today until I said, I just don't care anymore. I'm so compelled to do this, which is the only reason you should do acting, because there's so much up and downs and sometimes you can't put food on the table. But I just couldn't deny it anymore. But that's how it started, with escapism and fantasy. And of course, I learned it's much more than that. But I think that's where the seed was planted.
Right. But I'm a terrific fan of yours and what you do. And one of the things, and we've talked about this, you have an extraordinary gift for language, your ability to think on the spot and come up with kind of rhymes and puns and turning words around, sort of wordplay, kind of bon mot. I've always said that, if you had been alive maybe 30, 40 years earlier, you would have been a natural successor to Jack Parr and Johnny Carson and that kind of host. And, I'm interested because you must have always had that ability. And I'm wondering if you used that sort of quick wit as a defense when you were a kid growing up, as you say, in pretty tough situations. Was it a hindrance or a help to be, so facile with language? Did you manage to kind of get out of trouble by getting people to laugh?
I think a lot of people have a similar story to what you just described, but it wasn't really like that for me. I was so shy and so unsure of myself. And I did it through sports and being as good as I possibly could. And I practiced hours and hours, hockey or throwing a rubber ball against the wall for my aim. Even if it was freezing outside, it wouldn't matter. I thought that was the way I was going to do it, because I didn't think I could ever be an actor. Like I said, I didn't know anyone who even knew what an actor was or how to go about it. And I don't think I was fast. I don't know when that happened. I think that when I started to feel comfortable in my own skin and I dealt with the issues of my father and all of that stuff, that's when I started experiencing the joy of life. That's when I gave myself the permission to do so. So I don't think I was those nice things you said about me until much later on. I was a late bloomer. Like, I didn't know how to talk to girls. I still don't, but I try. That doesn't stop me. I still try. But as far as the sense of humor and all that, I didn't have joy in my life for a long time, based on my story and everything else. So once I was able to put that aside and deal with it, then it just came naturally, oddly enough.
Because we met doing Meeting of Minds. Steve Allen, for those of you that don't remember, Steve Allen wrote a series of plays, I guess. They were sort of conversations between four dead people. It was like a talk show. He was the talk show host, and he'd invite Attila the Hun and Joan of Arc and Galileo and Charles Darwin onto his talk show, and these guests would chat, and they were fascinating pieces. And you were Steve Allen, talk about talk show hosts. You stepped into his shoes. Did you do a lot of research on that? Did you know much about Steve Allen before taking him on, or?
I didn't. It was a little before my time. And the only reason I mean, it's not like I auditioned or anything. You know, our mutual friend, Dan Loria, suggested me because Gary Cole, the original, well, Steve Allen's the original Steve Allen. But in this version of Meeting of Minds, it was Gary Cole, wonderful actor, but he was working all the time. And one day they said, hey, can you fill in? And I did. So I became, I guess, the de facto backup to Gary when he couldn't do it. And then I started doing more because he was so busy, and I was so glad to do that. But yeah, I probably did as little research on Steve Allen. I mean, if you're going to play someone real, either alive or dead, you want to do research to understand things. But soon as I read things about him, I got so scared. I said, I can't play him. I mean, not only was the originator, co-creator of The Tonight Show, he was the host. He did the Steve Allen Show. He was a musician, artist, writer, composer, real raconteur. And on top of that, he won a Grammy in 1964 for Best Original Jazz Composition. By his own account, he wrote over 8,500 songs, 50 books. I said, where do I start to understand a guy like that, to play a guy like that? So immediately I just slammed the proverbial book in my nose and said, I just try to understand a little bit of why he was the host of Meeting of Minds and how it came about, because it really was fascinating. This from 1977 to 1981 on PBS. This thing ran. It was, to me, one of his greatest works. I just loved the idea of it. So, and I didn't watch it when I was younger, of course, because I didn't understand how valuable that was at the time. I was interested in sports and the aforementioned girls that I was having no luck with. But as I got older and came to understand that, such an honor to be able to play that. And of course, I didn't do him justice, but I had a blast.
Yeah, no, you did a great job. And I always, because I hadn't grown up with it, I knew nothing about it until we started working on them. And I knew very little about Steve Allen, but it amazed me how entertaining they were and informative they were. And not just informative, but would kick off discussions. I mean, the five of us that were performing, I don't think we ever did one of those shows where we didn't talk after the show about the show and about those characters, because it's just a fascinatingly informative idea to have all these different people from history, you know, getting to talk together and finding their different agendas and where they disagree. I remember one of them, everyone was ganging up on Attila the Hun for being such a bloodthirsty killer, this sort of, you know, massacring villagers and things on the tundra. And he says, wait a minute, how many people did you kill with the atom bomb? I mean, seriously, you know, you think of yourselves as these, you know, good guys, you know, you've done just as bad things. And it was just always, he was always interested in those sort of arguments. Do you think that level of sort of smart entertainment has a place anymore? That's the thing I worry about, that it wouldn't. Do you think it would play today? Do you think you could get something like that on TV?
I certainly hope so. You know, I don't know much about programming and you know, what people like, what they don't at any particular time, but I think there's always room for not only intelligent discussion, but holding up the mirror to today's society and see how much we have in common with our ancestors from different countries. Now, I remember that Attila the Hun. I mean, of all the ones we did, so funny you would say that, because what he said after that, and that's burned into my brain as well. He said, you killed all hundreds of thousands of people. When I killed people, at least I looked them in the eye.
Right.
And that stays with you. And because the cast itself, we had rehearsed it, we did it, we didn't have to stick around and talk about it, but it was so compelling. And I imagine the audiences did so even more so, because to them it was brand new. I think there's got to be, I hold out hope there's always a place for that kind of material and entertainment.
Well, let's talk a little about the material that sort of really put you very much front and center in the public's eye, which was The Booze Traveler. And you told me this wonderful story about how you got that job, which is so perfect because, you know, this is showbiz, these sort of random moments that change our lives. Just tell me remind me what happened, how you actually landed that gig.
Dumb luck.
Usually is.
But there is a little bit of a story behind it. So I was involved in a film that I had upcoming, and I saw a breakdown for this audition, and I really hadn't done a lot of hosting, a little bit, but my passion was acting, and it always seemed like hosting just kept coming around again. And so I went on this audition, and I wasn't even going to go. Like 5 minutes before I was going to be too late, I just got off the couch and said, let me go practice anyway, even though I can't do it. And as you know, and I don't know if anyone else does, they hate it when you go to an audition and you can't do the job. Oftentimes they'll ask you, are you available for these dates? Which gives you a false sense of security if they ask you after the audition. Oh, I was so good. They want to know if I'm available. No, they just want to make sure it doesn't happen. What happened with me? So I went to the audition, and I knew I couldn't do it, so I was loose and free, and they weren't telling me anything about it. We had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they just started asking random questions. Usually they're aside, something you read off of. Say, hi, my name is Jack Maxwell. Welcome to blah, 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 blah. Here we are today with, and then you memorize it to whatever degree so they can see what kind of a host you are, presumably, anyway. And they had promised it to someone else, I guess, or they said maybe they had someone else in mind for it. We would just fill in time until that time. So less pressure, I guess, right? So I went in and we talked about this and that. And have you been here? Would you do this? And blah, blah, blah. And then they said, would you eat Rocky Mountain oysters, which we all know are bull's testicles? And I wouldn't want to eat them, but you don't say no at an audition, just like at an improv, I guess, right? Sure, I'll do it, whatever you say. And they said, oh, okay. Would you drink them in vodka? What does that have? Wait a minute. What? I certainly thought they were going to ask me like something crazier. Vodka makes it easier, doesn't it? You just wash them down. That's okay. Sure. These are all of these internal thoughts I had. So I said, yeah, of course. Why? They said, well, what would you call that? Quick. I said, I don't know, but it sounds like a highball. And they said, wait a minute.
Sing.
Is that how you would do the show? With a sense of humor? I said, well, I don't know, because they were looking for Anthony Bourdain type, you know, because he was wildly successful. Rest in peace, Mr. Bourdain. And I said, well, listen, he's great at what he does. He's a chef and an author, and he's lived so much more of life in a certain way than I have. I couldn't do it the way he does it, and he wouldn't want to do it the way I might do it. So they said, all right, so we'll think about it. I got a call back right away. Next day, I go in for the callback, and they keep narrowing it down and less people, and it's down to 7 of us. And they brought us in at some point during that callback, and they said, they did a 180. They ask you some question about whatever, what's your favorite sport? And as you start the sentence, they said, quick, tell us a dirty joke. You have 2 seconds. It better be really dirty, really funny. Go. And for people who are, what? They were just sending them out. I mean, that was the line of demarcation. If you didn't start something right away, they figured, well, you're not going to be good in the field around the world talking to strangers and everything, especially people who maybe don't speak English as a first language. So I just happened to pop into my head the dirtiest, filthiest, funniest joke I know. And at the end, they were laughing. And they said, okay. And then I went back.
We jumped forward, we edit that bit out. And now you say,
oh, okay. Oh, good. I'm glad they didn't hear that. And so then they called me in after hours and hours of the callback session that day. And they were all against the wall. And they called me in and said, everybody go home. We'll call your agents. But Jack, can we talk to you about immunizations? Because you haven't had a lot of international immunizations in the last few years. That's because I hadn't left the country. It's very odd to me. I knew something was up. So I go in, and they're all lined up against the wall with their arms folded and all of that. And some have smiles and some don't. And they're looking at me very intensely as I sit in the chair with the lights on. And they said, we didn't really know how to say that, and we didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you got the job. I said, great. I can't do it. What? They look like the 3 monkeys. They're like this. Seen it? What? What? I can't. What? I said, yeah, I'm doing a movie. They said, why would you come to an audition? You can't take the job. I said, are you kidding me? Really? I audition all the time. I never get the job. I just came to practice. So after they cursed a few times and, kicked the wall away, I don't know, whatever they did, very kindly, they moved one of the countries. We were supposed to go to India at the front of it. They moved it to Nepal and they put it at the back. And they waited for me basically to finish the film. So the day I wrapped the movie, I flew straight out to Hawaii, and the executive producer of the film was asking me all these questions about the show. Just so happens it was John Densmore, drummer for the Doors, and
Wow.
and I was like, wow, this is cool. He says, no, what you're doing is cool. Tell me about that. I said, no, you're John Densmore. I want to hear Doors stories. So he just told me all these great insights and how he felt about it and all this iconic rock band. And then I said, I'll tell you when I come back how it went. But anyway, that was the pilot. And it took them a while to sell it. And they finally did.
Right.
Travel Channel picked it up, and the rest, as they say.
The rest is history. Listen, I want to just remind our viewers, if you want to send in some questions for Jack or for myself, or just do that. We've got a little scroll here where you can find us on Facebook and YouTube. So fire your questions this way, and we'll hopefully get to answer some of them. The thing about Booze Travel, which I always enjoyed, was, yes, it was about you going and drinking exotic drinks all over the world, but you always told me it was really about a lot more than that. That's what it was on the surface. But what it was really about was something, much more interesting. What was your take on that?
What's great about that? I don't think any of us knew exactly what it should be from the beginning. So there was a lot of trial and error. And thankfully, Travel Channel gave me some room to grow. The production company, Carga 7, did the same. And we finally landed on, and again, we were talking about this earlier, the joy of life. So many cultures around the world are just happy to be alive. When you sit down with a drink with someone, it's just joy. It means it's the end of the day, or you're celebrating, or sometimes you're mourning with alcohol, but most of the time it's a good thing. And I'm not talking about excess. I just mean what it does for you and how it brings you to a certain place. And sometimes it connects you with your ancestors and where you came from around the world. So it was just so wonderful. The people, even before we started drinking, they were just so warm and welcoming. And so I was doing press once, I think at the very beginning, and they said, so what's this show about? Going around the world getting drunk? I said, no, not at all. It's a celebration of life and of culture through the lens of a shot glass.
Right.
And they said, oh, that's great.
There's ritual, religious rituals involve that, and greetings, celebrating, weddings. I mean, as you say, around the world, it's like a universal language of celebration and greeting and, even ritual, something kind of spiritual. And I always found that fascinating, because the show was really about these amazing people that you met, as you say, and the joy they had, and the sort of strange concoctions that they would find in their surroundings. I mean, I remember there was one. What was the one in the jungles with a frog?
Yes, actually, we were sailing the Amazon, and we had the locals who are our fixers, our helpers, go to this tribe who, they're a little wary of outsiders. So we had to spend some time with them before they let us film them. And, I'm sorry, that was the spit beer. That was Peru. I'm sorry. The frog was also Peru, but it was a market in Peru where you go. I was confused because it's the same country. And you go and they say, pick a frog. And it looks like a juice bar, basically, third world juice bar. It's not, it's not fancy with all the stuff. There's a lot of ingredients, fresh. They just cut it. It was great. I was very happy to be there, but there were frogs there. Like, one of these things doesn't belong at a juice bar. A box of frogs, I think, is a little out of place. And so they said, pick a frog. And I did. And I said, and I always told the crew and everyone, whenever they could, I want to be surprised in the moment. I want that discovery to happen on camera. So you don't have to tell me a lot of stuff. Just lead me there and let us play. And so she said, pick a frog. And I had a translator, Bruno Canali, great guy. And I picked a frog, and she cut the throat, pulled the skin up off the frog's face, like in one of those movies. Aha, you thought I was him. I'm really this guy. One of those. No, I'm really that guy.
I'm not a frog at all.
Right.
I'm a shrew.
That's it. And she pulled the skin completely down its body in one move. This frog was skinless. She puts him in a blender with warm water, she said, tree root, spices, moonshine. And you see him, he's starting to, bleed slightly because he has no skin. And, he's swimming around thinking, I'm freezing. I know I had a jacket when I came in here. What's going on? What are they doing? Zoom! All of a sudden, he's all over the place. And he's liquefied, and she hands it to me. And oddly enough, for whatever else they put in there, it's green, even though only the frog's skin is green, really. And there was no skin. I found that oddly fascinating, and it distracted me long enough to say, all right, down the hatch, because I would never want to go somewhere and experience all of who they are without also experiencing their hospitality through whatever they give me to eat or drink or play a sport. That's why I played crazy sports, even though I could get hurt. I could, chase bulls, whatever, because they invited me to do so. And I really wanted to immerse myself, not just stand at the edge and stare into the abyss, but jump in. And sometimes maybe I should have thought twice about it, but certainly not with drinks. It's a cultural thing. So I drank it, and it was different. It was only because it didn't taste that bad at all, actually, because the moonshine was so strong that they put in it. But
it's just
it's the idea that
the idea and the texture probably. But
a couple minutes ago, because the bones, the eyes, everything was in there, and you drink it all. And I said, 2 minutes ago, Kermit was alive, and now I'm.
And now you tell me, what did you call that? What was that? What did you name that one?
There was a name for it. I just called it Frog in a Blender because I couldn't say the name. I know that's a little too on the nose.
Well, this is the thing about you. You're wonderfully curious. You're a perfect host for a show like this because you're like a bit like me. You're just endlessly curious and ready to jump in for a new experience. And I guess that leads me to one of the shows you're producing, The High Road, which is a fascinating look at the sort of flip side of CBD and marijuana, and you got into that for health reasons. Just tell us briefly about the High Road, because that's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, what happened was I was doing Booze Traveler, and 2 seasons in, I get diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the doctor said, okay, well, we can do something and we don't have to, we can wait. And I said, well, I want to live first and foremost, but I'm doing this really cool show. I'd love to go back on the road and do it. Maybe one of these wild concoctions will help me with this non-Hodgkin's, right? Act as some kind of a chemo, or maybe I'm already pickled. Who knows? And oddly enough, the first 2 scans, 3 months apart after the diagnosis, got a little bit better. And he said, you can do that when you practice positive mental attitude or you stay upbeat, because you can really talk yourself into getting sick, especially when your body's already compromised. So I went back on the road. And then after those 2 scans, he said, well, we can wait longer next time. The next one, not so good. And this is over a period of time. And then the last one, it had gone past where I was. And they said, I think it might be time to do something. So we had a natural break coming up, a hiatus, as they call them. And I went into treatments, very severe treatments for 4 months of this very heavy chemo, 6 hours a day. I was in the chair, and it was a mixture, a concoction of, life-saving drugs. There's no other way to say it, right? And it was 1 day every 3 weeks because your body had to recover. It was so intense. And during that time, Booze Traveler got canceled, not for that reason, I don't think. It's not like they replaced me with someone else, which they have done in the past. They were just moving away from that kind of programming and more towards, as you know now, from Travel Channel, paranormal, which is fine. I'm grateful that I had a job for 4 years. I have nothing bad to say about that decision. I missed the show. It would be great to still be doing it, but at the same time, I had to save my life. So the chemo caused a couple of things. First of all, they said I was going to lose my hair and it was going to come back white because I'm old. I said, great, thanks a lot. Any other pep talks you want to give me? And you're probably going to get real sick. So I bought an adjustable bed so I didn't choke on my vomit at night, because I pictured that happening, because sometimes I'm a heavy sleeper. But that never happened. Never lost my hair, never got sick. But I did get a thing called neuropathy, which is severe nerve pain. And through my doctor, I was referred to a pain doctor, and I started talking about the what else I could do, because I didn't want to take opiates. As you know personally, and most people know who've seen more than a couple of interviews I've done, my father was a drug addict, so I really wanted to stay away from opiates if I could, and I've been that way my whole life, in case I had some kind of genetic predisposition, some weakness towards that, and because it can be inherited, right? So I said, what else can I do? And they said, well, have you tried CBD? I don't do cannabis. Well, no, it's not really cannabis. CBD is from the other side of the plant. So I educated myself completely on it. And I realized not only is it doing great things for people, anecdotally, all these stories I got, but we were lied to about what it was and how bad it's supposed to be for you and everything else, which is really a shame. Then I knew there's something up. So I really researched it historically, and when it was banned in 1937, it was for all the wrong reasons, mostly anyway. And so I started doing that, and I got together with some people who helped me do the show. And then, because once I discovered not only does it help, but why is it being kept from us? Because it's easing sufferings on so many levels for so many people, or suffering anyway. I went around the United States and I found all these people who were helped by it. People who didn't want to take cannabis, but tried it and got results. Now, you know, that's the best kind of testimonial, right, Charlie? Because if someone is against something and they try it and it changes their mind, their philosophy, their religious outlook towards drugs or whatever, then you know that it's really happening. It's not that they're predisposed to wanting to believe it if you already do. So we spoke to people who have used cannabis their whole life, but it's the political side of it, the legal, the socioeconomic, all of it, but mostly how people are easing their suffering through that. And I just found it fascinating. It's called The High Road with Jack Maxwell, and we're doing it right now live on Facebook and YouTube. And it starts with a live Q&A every Friday night, 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. Then we have the show, and then an interview afterwards. So it's a lot, lots of fun, and I'm still learning. But if you have any curiosity about that, I hope you'll join me.
I highly recommend it. It's a fabulous show, and it brings us to an interesting part in the show, because you know, as you say, you grew up with a dad who was an addict, and you saw firsthand the kind of trauma that wrought through your family and in your own life. And, you know, as you know, the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps, they see the results of addiction in families all the time. And they have a wonderful program, the COASA, for children of alcoholics and substance abusers, that deals with this. And I think it's important to draw the distinction between, because you growing up with an addict in the family, it's kind of ironic that two of your most successful shows are about alcohol and marijuana. But it's important to draw that distinction between the substance and the abuse. And the abuse isn't caused by the substance. The abuse comes out of many other factors. And the substance, just as it might be alcohol or a drug or a car, or you know, in a marriage, there can be spousal abuse. The abuse is caused by something else, and the substance becomes the kind of agent of it. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely. You know, I got some grief when I started doing Booze Traveler until people watched the show, because booze is in the title. And you know, personally, I've received some grief about that. But then they watch and they say, "Oh, it's not about getting hammered 24 hours a day. It is really a celebration of what people drink around the world. It's certainly not scientific. It's participatory,
Right.
of course, and it's experiential, but it's not like I celebrated excess."
Right.
And so they say, "Okay, I'll give you a pass on that." But what? Now you're doing the high road. What's that all about? And I say it's about wellness, really.
Right.
Vertical
Right.
Wellness is the company that's behind it as well. It's about that, about making people better and showing them there might be a different way to look at things, hence taking the high road, you see.
Right.
So it is odd because I wanted to stay away from any kind of substance abuse because of my father. And I promised my mother I'd never do drugs or anything like that. And of course, I'm known to tipple a little. I like a couple of cocktails, but I'm still not really a casual drug user. Even with cannabis, I think it's great for certain conditions. And by the way, if you want to use it, good for you. I have nothing against it. It's so mild in comparison to not only other drugs, but comparison to opiates. I mean, cannabis has never killed somebody, and opiates certainly has, I'm sure. So the one thing about that, though, I wanted to let you know, I didn't even grow up around my father. I wish I would have, because I might have learned the lesson earlier. I might have seen it, if it was right in my face. They split up when I was 1 or something like that.
Right.
And maybe he came around, from time to time, but not often enough. And as I got older and we were going to move to Boston, I saw him, every once a month or on the weekend, once in a while, but still not enough. And then I realized as I got older, why? Because he was a drug addict. And I don't mean just occasional drug user. He would stick needles in his arm full of Dilaudid. And after high school, now this is before I knew he was an addict, I went to live with him for a year because I wanted to get to know my father, as I think every boy would want to, especially because I didn't spend time with him. And I was coming into manhood, and I wanted to know who I was through my father. Mistake. That's a big mistake. I went there and I found a hypodermic needle on the floor, and I didn't understand. And I found his drugs, and he ended up going to prison while I was there. So I had to move back. My plan was to really, live with him for a couple of years and get to know him and do all the boy and dad things we never did. But it's okay. I mean, this is the way it goes. He had his own problems, certainly, and he dealt with them however he could. For me, it was never going to be that, though. I promised my mother and my grandmother, who raised me, that I would never do that. So I'm not perfect, but drugs is not one of my problems.
Right. I mean, we're very fortunate because we actually have in the green room, online green room, who can join us now, Anna Di Biasi, who's the Director of Development at the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. Hi there, Anna.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Anna.
So,
how are you?
I'm good. So you've been following this conversation. I like to bring you in on this because you've seen a lot of situations that Jack was talking about where drugs and alcohol abuse has fractured families and left children really damaged. What would you say that what we were talking about where the damage starts? It obviously the drugs and the substances are the agents, but where does the damage really start?
Yeah, so I think a way that we like to kind of understand behaviors in this work is through what we call a trauma-informed lens or a trauma-responsive lens. So that really challenges us to look at behaviors and understand that a lot of them that seem harmful, including substance abuse, are really forms of coping mechanisms with substance abuse. A lot of times it's about numbing the really intolerable feelings that can come along with being exposed to different traumatic situations. So I think you're right. It's not necessarily the substance itself, but it's sort of what's the pain underneath that the substance is being used to numb.
Right, change the environment. It's like the toxic environment that creates the trauma, and say you then go to the substance as a kind of numbing agent. And it isn't, just in the kind of areas of society, economically and socially deprived areas. I mean, you get drug abuse, at the highest levels of Wall Street as well, again, as a coping mechanism for those pressures. But I guess what's tragic is when it happens in a family and the children are the sort of primary victims of it and take the most damage through no fault of their own, and then have to go out into the world, sometimes in that same toxic environment, economically and socially kind of depressed environment, carrying that burden of hurt with them.
Yeah.
How do you move them through that trauma?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. Kids are incredibly resilient, which is amazing. So sometimes all they need is a little bit of extra support. So our COASA program really is about just that. It's about support. It's about education. It's about helping improve our kids' self-worth, because a lot of times there's shame around it, or they want to blame themselves. It's confusing why these things are happening. So our job is to help them feel safe and to sort of arm them with as much good information and help them build strong connections and relationships.
Right.
And Maureen, who runs the program, is phenomenal at building those relationships with our kids.
Can I say something, Charlie, about that?
Yeah.
I was on my friend Jillian Barbery's podcast when I said this for the first time publicly, but I was a victim of sexual abuse and physical abuse, and I wanted to numb that feeling because the perpetrator got away with it for years, and it happened over the course of 2.5 years, and no one believed me, etc. And without wallowing too much in that, I just wanted to say that it's so strange how some curses can turn out to be blessings, because by the time I was discovering what drugs can do to you, I found out my father was a drug addict, and I made that promise to my mother never to do it. Now, to hide from the pain of the abuse and the low self-esteem it caused in me, and the trauma that'll probably be with me the rest of my life, although I have worked on it, I would have probably turned to drugs. I have to say, I needed that feeling to go away. So I somehow dealt with it in other ways, maybe becoming an actor, whatever that, the drug of the applause or the audience, I don't know. But had he not, I'm sure I would have been. So even then, again, it's not the substance. It's the behavior based on the trauma. If you don't deal with it, one wrong decision in your life, or one decision, whether it's wrong or right at the time, can change the course of everything. Right. And I guess in a way I was lucky.
Yeah. So you've found ways to be supported and found outlets. So sometimes that's all it takes. So that's what our program does for these kids. And, I liked your point about, in your experience, in your shows, how oftentimes in different cultures, they'll use substances as a part of ritual and connection. And those are two things that in this kind of trauma healing work that we value very much. So it's a very interesting question to ponder. So thank you, guys.
Right. We've had a lot of comments about self-esteem being one of the, the biggest traumas that this sort of abuse and growing up in a traumatic environment can leave you with this damaged self-esteem, and it takes so much time to get over that. We also had a comment from Amanda about how it's all well and good talking up a good game, but again, I want to just emphasize to our viewers how much the Children's Action Corps, they don't just talk a good game, they actually play a good game and walk the walk. So if any of you feel inclined to find out more about the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps, you can go to their website, rfkchildren.org, and there's an opportunity to discover more, to support them, see what they're doing in your area, programs that you might be able to support financially or otherwise. So please, I urge you to do that, because Anna and her colleagues really walk the walk with these kids. And Kawasa is just one of many programs that they have. And during our conversations, we'll bring those back into it. But thank you for joining us for that, Anna. I appreciate your comments and your input. And if we get any more questions during the show, we'll fire them your way. But,
all right. Thank you so much, you guys, and thanks for auctioning that guitar, Jack.
I still can't believe somebody bought a broken guitar for $750, but it's for a great cause.
That's
so
right.
I'm very happy to do it.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
So Jack, we're getting kind of towards the end. I have a sort of old chestnut question, but it's always interesting. If you could design the next job, your next, what would you ideally like to do in the next 10 years? And you've done so many things as a host, as an actor, as now a producer. What would your ideal design, for the next 10 years in terms of producing, acting, directing, writing, how would you design those 10 years?
Wow. I want to do it all, Charlie. I'd love to get back on stage with you and the wonderful people we did Meeting of Minds with. That was a blast. I was so fortunate, and I still can't understand how it happened to be on stage with Al Pacino. Just to watch people like you and Al and all these people work was fascinating to me. But then the polar opposite, to go around the world and to work with non-actors, people who just want to share their culture with you. I mean, and anything in between, whether it's television or movie. I think all of it is fascinating at different times. I don't understand people who say, I met someone, and you know this from playing the wonderful Shane Donovan on Days of Our Lives. You had one of the most iconic and famous characters. People still remember you for this. But I had two actor friends of mine over the years who said, I only want to do soaps. I said, you're really narrowing down the work choices there. What do you mean you only want to do soaps? Well, I'm good at learning lines, and I like that, and I like having close-ups on my for every wrong reason. I just didn't understand it. Another person said, I only want to do 3 really big movies. I'm not going to waste my time with anything else. I said, how do you think you get into big movies? You got to start somewhere. For me, if it all paid the same, I would do it all. But the unfortunate thing about being an actor who does only this, or a host in this case, is you got to keep that roof over your head. You got to keep food on the table, right? So with that in mind, I'd love to do another show where I see the world. But I'd be very happy doing a show whether as a host or an actor, back on stage. Or I just did a film a friend of mine wrote and directed and made me the lead in, called The Pragmatist. And I just love it all. I really do. I'm still like a little kid in a candy store. I'm still that little kid watching Batman and Robin, now inserting myself into the show. I just love it all.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the great, doing the Nanny for 6 years was wonderful. And as you felt with Booze Traveler, when it finishes, it's a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, you don't have a paycheck anymore. But it then freed me up to do things that I probably wouldn't have been doing if I was doing a successful TV show. You kind of get the summer hiatus, and you've made so much money during the summer. You go, well, you know what? I'm just going to take it easy. But because I suddenly didn't have a paycheck coming in, I had to start taking whatever came up, and that's how I got into doing musicals. I mean, you say you can't sing and dance. You should hear me sing and dance. I mean,
first
you
of
can
all,
sell it. You can get away with it.
Charlie, this is your show, but I have to interrupt you. You were great in 42nd Street. You sang and you danced. I saw that right here in Tempe, right? The Center for the Arts. And you played Scrooge and you sang and danced. What are you talking about? You're just being
I get away with it. I surround myself with very talented people who can sing and dance, so I get away with it. But it's something that I love doing, and I would never have had that opportunity had I been working on TV all the time. So you're right. We just get a question from Lonky. Lonky says, if you guys would be able to star in a soap now, would you do it? Would you? Yeah, I guess your answer is the same as mine. If they're going to pay you, would take it, right?
And I'd like to point out the icon, I think, was Fran Drescher from The Nanny. So I don't know who Lonky Bonky is, but
Lonky Bonky, I don't think.
Isn't that Fran?
It is Fran's picture.
Icon?
I don't think that's Fran asking the question.
No, but the icon is.
Yeah, the icon is. That's Fran. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Fran.
So, do you remember that scene?
What?
Do you remember that scene in that outfit?
It all kind of blurs. People ask me what was my favorite scene, and it all kind of blurs into things. I just remember all these amazing guest stars, like you saying, working with Al Pacino. I mean, I suddenly found myself on the set with Donald O'Connor. I'd just seen him singing in the rain that night,
Oh, yeah.
and Taylor and Elton John and I sat down and talked soccer because he owned the
Wow.
English soccer team, Watford FC. So we talked football with Elton John. It was
Wow, that's something.
It was these incredible guest stars who'd come by.
Sure. That's great. And by the way, I'll live off that the rest of my life. I don't care if people are tired of me talking about work with Al Pacino. It's like 15 years ago or something, and I don't care. I'm still going to talk about it. Yes, I would do a soap opera. Sure, absolutely. As long as, we loved it. We liked the material. It was fun. It was interesting. Of course, I'd certainly consider it, for sure.
Good job. So now here's a question. Do you have a mentor? Do you have was it one person or maybe a couple of people in your life who you look on as a mentor who's kind of guided you either professionally or personally?
There's a handful of them. I think the first one, my mother was so busy trying to raise the family by herself. My grandmother was my first mentor and taught me about life and, what to avoid the pitfalls. She was pretty sharp. She got, as a young woman with 2 kids, her Italian, right from Italy, husband whacked her in the nose, and she was a tough Irish lady. She took the kids, walked out, and that was it. I mean, she didn't stand for anything, and she was still probably to this day the sweetest person I've ever met, a real saint on earth. So she shepherded me through those tough years. And then it was certain friends that you get to know, not necessarily older ones, even friends your age might know more than you in certain areas. So you share that, which is what the beauty of friendship. And then teachers who saw maybe a little something special in me, maybe, and said, hey, let me tell you this, or let me tell you that. And then when I started acting, just certain people that like you, I never felt confident that I could be on the same stage or set with actors like you and Dan Lauria and all the people I've worked with. It goes on and on. And so just even a kind word, like they say in Orphans, a little encouragement treat, and Joe Bologna and Renee Taylor, who oddly enough, she was on the Nanny. She was Fran's mother. They kind of took me under their wing 10 years ago when I auditioned for Lovers and Other Strangers to be on stage with them. When they chose me, I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, they're going to discover I'm a fraud and fire me right away.
We all have that fear.
I got past
we all have that fear that any minute now we're going to be rumbled.
Sure.
I think every actor, no matter how successful, always has that fear that any minute now people are going to realize that I actually don't know what I'm doing. The whole thing's been a fraud. Do you ever watch yourself back? Do you, Ray Jones had a question. Do you watch yourself on TV when you've done a job? Do you watch yourself back on tape?
I used to in the early days because I still couldn't believe that I was on television, on a show, or in a movie. I haven't in a long time. Although with Booze Traveler, I did, because as the host, I wanted to make sure that I was expressing how I really felt. So I wanted to make sure maybe if I had any habitual tics or things that I didn't want to act. Unlike with acting, as Spencer Tracy said, don't let them catch you do it. The secret to acting. This Booze Traveler thing, hosting that, I used my name. I didn't want to act. I didn't want to perform. I just wanted to be completely, totally in the moment and honestly expressing what was going on. If the drink was great, I wanted to say it. If it wasn't, I wanted to say it wasn't. And whatever it was, I mean, we never fixed any of the games so that I would win at them or be good at the sports. I said, let it play out in real time because it's a real experience we want to give these people. And so that being said, I watched the show to see how it came out because I was such a big part of it. But since then, I've done a few things and not really. I think for me, the joy is in doing it, really.
Right.
What about you?
True. Yeah, I mean, I think I feel the same way. It's like, there was, I guess I've had teachers, mainly teachers, and I had a wonderful English teacher who kind of turned me on to the joy of plays and reading and understanding plays and things. And I also had friends of my parents. I remember one of the greatest bits of encouragement I had is I did a school play. I did Prospero in The Tempest. And this friend of my parents sent me a very nice fan letter with a £1 note in it and said, here, you know, here's your first professional payment on the set. I must have been 14 at the time, or 12 or something. 12, I think it was. 13. Wow. And I thought, wow, someone's actually paid me some money because of a performance I did. And I think that was one of the most encouraging things I've ever had.
You know, as far as that goes, I always, in a thing like this, I would leave someone out. My very first agent was the first person to believe in me, saw me on a stage at a workshop and really took me under her wing. She was a wonderful Broadway actress and agent, Janine Cosden. And without her, I wouldn't be anywhere. She actually talked a hosting agency that was just opening to take me on as a host when I hadn't hosted anything ever, because she said, he's going to make a good host someday as well as a good actor. So she took me for that, and the agency took me for hosting. And then things kind of picked up from there because she believed in me before I believed in myself.
Right. Right. That's all it takes is someone else to believe in you and give you that opportunity to believe in yourself.
Or give you a £1 note.
Self-esteem. What?
Or give you a £1 note.
Or give you a £1 note.
Pay you for your work.
Same thing. Jack, this has been such a pleasure. I've so enjoyed it. The time has flown by, but we kind of we're getting around to needing to wrap this up. But thank you so much for coming on and spending an hour with me. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope everyone watching, joining in, enjoyed it too. Again, thank you to the RFK Children's Action Corps for presenting this, to Dana Josum, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who's the sort of magic. She's like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. She's actually making all these things happen on the screen. So thank you, Dana, for that. Thank you, Anna, for joining us on the panel, and to Tom Rosa, who helped put all this together. And again, if you're interested in finding out more about the Children's Action Corps, please go to rfkchildren.org and you can find out about their programs and how to support them. Again, thanks, Jack. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Charlie. This
has been fun. Did you enjoy yourself?
It's a blast. I can't believe it's almost been an hour. I'm looking at the clock. That's unbelievable.
It's pretty
so
fun.
Great.
And so from now on, each time we do this, I'm going to try and have someone else. As I don't know, it's going to be hard to find someone as entertaining as Jack, but someone who's entertaining and interesting, and we'll chat and have a conversation. And maybe we'll all learn a thing or two. So thanks.
You're so charming. You're so charming, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
All right, you take care, Jack. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.